I'm Lama Tantrapa, and I am delighted to share with you about Qigong coaching and how it can transform your practice of Tai Chi, Qigong, or any related disciplines. What happens is that we experience some challenges with these practices, and we also know that historically, not very many people actually become Qigong masters. Many drop out or just simply don't progress very far. The reason why we are here today is so that we would learn how to transform our practices of Tai Chi and Qigong and related disciplines. Now, when we study Tai Chi or Qigong or any internal arts, what happens? We engage in essentially learning a new culture, a new language, if it were. Since most of these arts come from the Asian cultures, such as China, Tibet, Japan, Korea, and other similar cultures that are not as familiar to most Westerners, when people in America who are not of Asian descent try to study these arts, they often have to really start from scratch. It's almost like learning a foreign language. You have to learn the alphabet of this language. And once you've figured out the letters, then you can put them together into several words. And sometimes when you put several letters together in a word, it doesn't make any sense. And some of these letters you put into words that make really good sense, but then putting these words together in a sentence is another challenge. So what we do is we learn how to organize our knowledge in a structured manner, in an organized fashion, so that when we try to communicate with others who are also practitioners of these arts, it actually makes sense. However, many teachers don't teach in this way. They don't teach in a way that is almost like learning a foreign language. In other words, the alphabet of this language is often not even taught. The grammar rules and the rules of how to assemble these letters of the alphabet into words are also often missing. In other words, the principles of the arts are often not presented in a way that would make sense to the students. And instead, the students simply learn forms. It's almost like trying to learn language from listening to the songs in that language. For example, one of the friends of mine back in Ukraine told me, I learned English by listening to the Beatles. I said, really? That's fascinating. Well, can you show me? And so he started singing these songs by the Beatles. And it sounded really good. And so I said in English a couple of phrases to him, like, well, very nice. I would like to hear more. And he actually didn't understand what I said. In other words, he didn't have any knowledge of the language. It's just that monkey see, monkey do, or in this case was monkey hear and monkey do. He could repeat the words verbatim with the right inflections, with the intonation and to music, but he didn't know what he was saying. Similarly, my mother, for example, used to be an opera singer before she became a scientist. And she sang in the Bolshoi Theater in Moscow, which is quite an accomplishment for most opera singers. And mind you, many operas are created or used to be created by either German or Italian authors and opera writers and musicians and composers. So what happened is that many of the German operas, say by Wagner, required the singer to sing in German. And she learned how to sing in German. And many of the Italians operas required singing in Italian. So she learned how to sing in Italian. She doesn't speak either one of those languages. So if she ended up going to Italy, she would have zero chance of being able to communicate with the local people. They say, when in Rome, do as Romans do. Well, one of the things people do in Rome is they speak Italian. And one of the things that is required for that is simply knowledge of the Latin alphabet, knowledge of the ways that the letters come together into words, and so that they would make sense in Italian. And then you have to also figure out how to put several words together to create each of the sentences that you try to communicate or try to understand. The funny thing about this is to observe when people do forms, whether it's Tai Chi forms, Qigong forms, any type of Kung Fu forms, any type of karate, katas, you name it. There are plenty of different variations on the theme of doing forms, often without understanding the principles underlying these forms. So when you see a person doing that, it's often like watching a person trying to sing opera without knowing the language. It looks kind of good, but underlying understanding is completely missing. How do I know that it's missing? I test. In my practice, I always test everything that I teach. And also I invite people who come to study with me, or other teachers and practitioners of the disciplines that I study, to go through the battery of tests so that we would both know that we are on the same page, we understand each other, and we also have the ability to check some of the things that may work better, some things that may not work so well, so we can choose intelligently those things that work best and discard things that don't work so well. As a matter of fact, I'm not the first one to come up with this simple and elegant understanding of things. Way before me, in the 70s, well-known movie actor and martial artist Bruce Lee had the exact same attitude and approach to martial arts. What did he do? He said, learn the knowledge of the old, test it, let go of what doesn't work for you, add what is authentic to you. Then you end up with a functional living art that can actually save your life on occasion. Well, that's exactly what I do in the internal arts and the energy arts. So essentially, I pick up where Bruce Lee left off. What we do is we study the principles of different arts, including my own art. Obviously, just like Bruce Lee also had his art that he was teaching and practicing called Jeet Kune Do, I have my own art as well. Even though I wasn't the one who designed this art, I didn't create Qidao. I inherited it from my grandfather. But nonetheless, I study and practice Qidao. However, I also studied and practiced probably 24 of different other styles and techniques and systems, including Tai Chi, several styles of Kung Fu, 3 or 4 styles of Kung Fu, 2 styles of Karate, Aikido, Muay Thai, Russian martial arts, anything from Sambo to Sistema, several different systems of Sistema. By the way, Sistema simply means system in Russian. And I assimilated knowledge that I learned from all of these styles, plus also my family lineage style of Qidao, and developed a novel approach that allows you to learn at an accelerated rate, because you're not focusing on the fluffy appearances of what forms represent. Instead, you're focusing on the inner essence of the art. And what's the inner essence of the energy arts? Well, it's the ability to fuel the flow of qi and to be in flow. Flow, then you experience the most profound sense of wellness and well-being. You feel empowered. You feel like you are one with the flow of things in the universe, the Tao. When you're practicing healing in the flow like that. You literally don't have to manipulate energy. You just simply observe where the energy flows and align yourself so that you would be more in the flow. And if you're healing yourself, that will provide you maximum empowerment and healing potential. And if you're working with another person, let's say a client, then you can facilitate their alignment with the flow of things. So in other words, you can help another person also get into the flow. And the most effective way to do that is by providing example. So if you're not in the flow, forget about it. You will not be able to teach somebody else how to be in the flow because you simply are not demonstrating how to do that and what the benefits of that are. So it's essential to be in the flow if you want to help anybody else. But first of all, we want to figure out how to help ourselves. And also, we test it. So for example, that's the reason why to practice martial arts. If you consider that martial arts provides you the instant testing opportunity for all the practices and skills that you've acquired, you simply put them to good use if they are functional, if they're helpful. In other words, you prevail in the martial arts context, everything is great, and you're a happy camper. If not, well, then your ass gets beat. Or if it is, for example, just simply practice of push hands, well, no big deal. Maybe you didn't get your ass beat, but at least you are feeling like you are effective in projecting energy, assessing how the energy is being projected at you, receiving it, transmuting it, recycling it, and essentially experience of push hands from two people trying to push each other to both people testing and learning as much as possible from this encounter. And when that happens, the most amazing thing occurs. Massive amount of learning happens right there. And of course, if you reminisce about that experience of push hands, you may also learn in hindsight. And you may also be able to videotape your practice of push hands or other type of practice that you engage in, and then watch it again. And we're not looking for the appearances, such as flowery movements that look nice and everything looks pretty. What we're looking for is whether or not you observe and apply the principles of energy awareness, of body awareness and alignment, of harmonious culture movement, as they call it. And this harmonious culture movement is not something that consists of just a few moves. No, even though I do teach moves, I understand that there's a need for recognizing there are certain particular methods of projecting energy to the right, to the left, up and down, back and forth, absolutely everywhere in three-dimensional sphere of energy. But instead of just doing this in the form of a particular repetitive drill, we learn how these movements are like words. So you bring these several words together, and that creates a particular projection of energy in one direction or another. Now, what derails people from that is usually lack of focus on the essence. Instead, people often tend to focus on the extraneous aspects of the art. And when it happens, you can focus on the essence. By definition, focus is the ability to concentrate your attention on one subject at a time. Or trying to focus on two things, that becomes really difficult. And when you try to focus at the same time on essence and the appearance, one or the other will be receiving less attention. And when we practice forms, by default, we tend to focus on the appearance or the form of the practice. So that's exactly why I invite you and I challenge you to develop focus dedicated to the essence of the arts. Now, what does it look like when you pay attention to the essence? It looks like this. First of all, you pay attention to the state of consciousness that you're in. If you are in the Qigong state, which by definition, at least my definition, is the Qigong state is the state of consciousness that allows you to feel the flow of Qi and to be in the flow. You develop this ability to feel the flow of Qi and step into the flow by developing the Qigong state. In Tai Chi circles, it may be called Tai Chi state. Whatever name you call it, that's irrelevant, really. It's important that you develop this state of consciousness that allows you to perceive the flow of Qi. Now, how do you perceive it? Well, there are different people with different perception strategies or methods. For example, some people are auditory. So they listen to energy. They hear some tones, some voices. And they like practicing things like 6 healing sounds. There's nothing wrong with that. It's a viable Qigong practice. People, for example, tend to focus on visual perception of energy. So they see colors, they see auras, they see certain energy patterns. That's excellent. And it also gives you an ability to perhaps understand where the energy is coming from, where it's going. But both of these, auditory and visual modes of perception, give you access to the energy flowing outside of yourself. In other words, you experience the second-hand experience of the flow of life force. You know, there is no life without movement. That's why I consider kinesthetic experience of energy as the primary and most authentic way of perceiving the flow of Qi, because you literally experience the flow of life force firsthand. Not just outside, but also inside. Of course, you also recognize with practice that what's outside and what's inside, it's relative. Things that you can consider inside the body that may also be happening outside. Energy fields, for example, permeate everything, including your physical body. And at the same time, it also still gives you the ability to feel the flow of Qi as it animates your body. That's right. Your kinesthetic experiences may be guided by much greater power than your personal power. That's right. The Tao has much bigger power than the power that you may identify with. And if you develop the ability to pay attention to the flow of things, the Tao, you align yourself with that greater power. And you can flow with it. In other words, anyone who goes against you actually ends up going against the flow of the whole universe. Now, that's really tough. And I certainly don't recommend going against the whole universe, because I've never seen anyone prevail. However, when you learn how to feel the flow, there is another important step to take. And it also requires a very specific mental switch that most people don't study and don't learn, because very few teachers teach that. Again, when they were students, they just didn't learn. And this is a really important switch that actually determines whether or not you will be able to be in the flow. It's the ability to surrender to the flow, because you trust that energy knows where to flow. That's right. I will deliver a separate webinar dedicated specifically to this subject. But what's interesting about it is that if you consider that in the universe, energy, it makes up everything. Basically, Our planet is made of energy. Our physical bodies are made of energy. The whole universe is made of nothing other than energy in a variety of different shapes and forms. E equals mc squared. So once we understand that everything is energy, then we simply need to learn the laws of nature that guide the movement of this energy. And by now we've learned a number of laws, and of course there are plenty of laws that we don't know yet. Of course, energy follows those laws that we do know, as well as those laws that we don't. And some of us understand laws of nature better than others. What's important is that we recognize that energy will always follow those laws. There is no chance for the energy to violate the laws of nature. If we are in alignment with the flow of energy, we are also in alignment with the laws of nature. Those we know, as well as those we don't know. When we consider where the energy does flow, it knows exactly where to flow, because it literally cannot flow somewhere where it's not supposed to flow. So when we are trying to manipulate the flow of qi, that often means that we don't understand certain laws. We don't understand, and may not ever understand, why it flows one way, doesn't flow the other way. We want it to flow the other way because we would like it to do that. But it's just simply not going, it's not happening. And when we try to make it happen, we often struggle and suffer because we are fighting against the flow of things. Not the most brilliant strategy, if you ask me. Now, what would be a more brilliant approach? Well, obviously, I advocate feeling where the flow goes and trusting that the flow knows where to go. Then you literally allow the flow of qi to animate your body. And you consistently keep testing. Does the flow go this way, or does it flow that way? How would you know? Well, which way is easier for you to move? Is it easier for you to move this way or that way? Is it easier for you to move this way or that way? How about this way versus that way? And you literally explore and experiment and discover for yourself what works and what doesn't work. And while you're doing that, you're finding more and more clearly the sense of being in flow. Essentially, it will teach you how to surrender to this flow. And this surrender is something that I consider a hallmark of a master. As you might have noticed, I mentioned in the invitation that you followed, which is why you're here in this webinar, that only a fraction of practitioners, maybe 5% at best, reach a reasonably high level of proficiency. And out of those people, even smaller fraction will actually achieve a level of mastery. And I don't perceive mastery as a destination, as a certain rank or height of achievement after which you plateau and say, okay, I'm a master, I don't need anything else, I've made it. Quite on the contrary, mastery is the process of mastering the arts. So you don't stop when you experience mastery. You realize, oh, I'm getting better at something that used to be difficult. Well, that's the definition of mastery. Being able to perform with ease that which other people have difficulty with. Now, it's a simplified version of mastery, but it's a functional definition that I invite you to put to good use. How would you put it to good use? Well, first of all, recognizing that mastery is the process, not destination. And when you become more masterful, you may start feeling like, wow, I'm actually doing better than I've ever done before in this art. Some people may even start addressing you as a master. Kudos to you. The idea is not to dwell on your laurels, of course. The idea is to continue progressing. And this is exactly what I'm here for. I don't just want to have a bunch of students. I want to help people become masters. People like you, who have dedicated a fair amount of time and energy and life to these internal arts. People like you, who are very inquisitive, curious, and open-minded. Now, open-mindedness, curiosity are some of the prerequisites for receiving quality coaching. Because if you are not coachable, you really won't be able to benefit from receiving coaching. I can try to coach you, but if you are not open-minded, for example, you're just going to stuck in a particular perspective, I will have to yank you out of that perspective, which is possible, but not always easy. However, what I always prefer to do is to use testing methodology. And that's exactly what allows me to work with people with dozens of years of experience under their belts, because they are okay with being tested. They've already done a series of tests, perhaps for different levels of black belt or other levels of training that they've gone through. In other words, testing is no longer scary. Letting go of fear, or not having fear of the unknown, is a crucial level of accomplishment in these arts, because a lot of people freak out about the unknown. Oh, this vibration starts happening in my body. I don't know what to do with it, so I better just quit. Well, once some things start occurring, such as vibration, for instance, or certain other changes of temperature, or kinesthetic experiences, or breathing shifts, or mental altered states, instead of perceiving them as problems, I always coach to perceive them as learning opportunities. I bet you've experienced in your life certain setbacks or certain challenges that at that point in time when they were happening were challenging, threatening, or at least unpleasant. You perhaps perceive them as problems. In hindsight, when you look at them again, whether it took you just a few minutes or a few years to look back, you probably realized that was an amazing experience that taught me a great deal. So this actually no longer needs to be perceived as a problem. Now we can perceive it as the same experience as a lesson or a learning opportunity. What happens when you perceive something as a learning opportunity? You entered an altered state of consciousness. I call it a learning state or a learning mode. And it's a very different state from the state of consciousness associated with dealing with problems. Because when you encounter a problem, you probably want to either break through, get rid of it, solve it, run away from it, or pretend it's not happening. Either one of these approaches mean that you're still struggling with it. And of course, when you have a learning opportunity, it's not something to struggle against. It's something to appreciate and open your mind to the opportunity to learn. So when that happens, when this shift happens from perceiving something as a problem to perceiving something as a lesson, you no longer struggle. You actually don't have a problem anymore. It's just like water. For example, imagine water flowing down this hill of the mountain. Eventually it runs into something, maybe a boulder on its path. If the water had voice and you could ask the water, so how did you overcome that problem that you ran into, that big boulder? The water probably would say, what problem? That boulder? It wasn't the problem. I found a way around it. In other words, water is not just going to reach a certain obstacle and just start banging the head against the wall. Water is going to flow somewhere. Where is it going to flow? Where the laws of nature allow it to. Whether it's gravity, the law of nature that allows it to flow down, or it's the hydrodynamics, the laws that guide the fluids to follow certain course of action, perhaps around certain obstacles in its way. So the water probably would say that was not a problem. It was a landmark that indicated where my course of action needed to change. It was a turning point on my journey downhill. Now, imagine what it would be like to live your entire life problems-free. That would be pretty freaking awesome, wouldn't it? That's exactly what I encourage you to do. To learn how to transform perception of any problems into learning opportunities. And of course, it's a lot easier to do that when there is somebody who can guide you through this process and also who has traveled down this path a few times. That's right. Since I started young at the age of 6, and I've been practicing martial arts my entire life since then, whether in the form of taking formal classes, working with my grandfather informally, serving in the special forces in the Soviet army, or teaching martial arts and other disciplines such as Qigong. I've been doing this for 40 years. What happens? I've traveled down this path and I've also come back several times, either because I realized that I missed certain step and I couldn't progress any further, or because I came back to help other people like you to take the journey further down this path. If you discover for yourself that you missed some of the steps along your path, you may also need to take the step back or several steps back to be able to learn the foundational piece that perhaps is missing, that literally makes the entire structure of your body of knowledge less balanced. Imagine trying to build a building with some of the cornerstones missing. That foundation is not going to be very stable, which will make the whole building much less stable. What do we do? Well, since you've probably already been practicing internal arts for some time, I would like to help you put the cornerstones where they belong. In other words, reinforce the foundation. And also make sure that all the other stories of the building have the proper elements in them. And those elements, by and large, are the principles that guide the developmental process of the artist along this path. And just like any art, or music, or sports, or other activities, we actually have a certain path, a certain journey that we follow. And also, we recognize that if we just follow somebody else's footsteps all the time, it's not going to be an authentic art. We're going to be playing somebody else's music, dancing to somebody else's tune, as it were. Essentially, we are learning how to move like somebody else does. And nobody's physique is the same. Everybody has unique physique and energy and consciousness. As a result of understanding that, we probably want to pursue more authentic rather than standardized type of practice. How do we create this sense of authenticity? Well, in order to be authentic, you need to test what works for you. Remembering that what works for you may not be the same with whatever works for the next person, or for a teacher, or for somebody else down the road. In other words, everybody will discover something that works better for them, but there are certain principles that allow us to understand why this works better, and also the principles have enough bandwidth, so to speak, to allow for a variety of interpretation. So it's not just a steadfast rule that everybody has to do it this way. Like sometimes teachers of Tai Chi and Qigong and similar disciplines teach the students, well, when you take this stance, let's say a Wuji stance, put your feet parallel to each other. Make sure that your toes pointing directly forward, either at your hip width or at shoulder width. And it actually robs people stability. If you never tested, you'll never know. I've tested hundreds, if not thousands of people over the course of this 40 years of my training. And I've never met anyone who would be stable with the feet perfectly parallel to each other. Why? Because the human body just doesn't work that way. There are only very few situations where your feet need to be parallel to each other. I can think of mostly skiing, downhill skiing in particular. If your feet are not parallel, you're not going to ski very far. However, you have to realize that skiing is just one of the few situations in life when feet have to be parallel to each other. In many other situations, that's not the case. Now, what is the angle between the feet? I'm not going to tell you because I want you to find out for yourself. Because there is no one right angle or one proper angle for everybody. It's going to be a specific angle for you, depending on how your body is structured and also depending on your holding patterns of tension. It has some tension in their bodies. As long as we identify with it, and it somatically manifests in the form of a pattern of holding tension. It's a very deep field of studies in and of itself, which is something I also teach in my certification courses. But when we understand that everybody's personality is distinct and authentic, at least different, what happens is that we understand that everybody's patterns of tension are going to be also distinct and different. And that means that the feet would need to be positioned just so that they would be appropriate for that particular holding pattern. And guess what? The holding patterns are subject to change, which is a beautiful thing. You don't have to be stuck in one pattern, stuck in one state of consciousness all the time. And that's also another important aspect of my teachings and coaching practice, is helping people expand beyond a particular state of consciousness that they get identified with so much that they believe that this is who they are. People often get so stuck in their particular pattern of thinking that they can't even imagine being some other way. Well, there are so many different people all over the world, 7+ billion of us. And each person has something unique about them. But it doesn't mean that we cannot expand our consciousness to embrace other aspects that may be unique to somebody else and integrate them into our being and then expand it further. As we progress through this process, we learn how to be in a variety of different ways. Now, in Tai Chi, there is a wonderful saying that you are the way you move. So if we're talking about different ways of being, we are also talking about different cultures of movement. What's the culture of movement? It's the overall system that integrates the principles according to which you move, certain patterns of movement, and certain agreement of tension in your body that may be either compensating for some misalignments or causing some imbalances and misalignments. As a matter of fact, when you start to understand different cultures of movement, you probably will become a connoisseur of this field of studies yourself. It's like learning foreign languages. If you learn different languages, you eventually discover for yourself the taste for learning new languages. So you don't have to be stuck in speaking one in the same language the entire life. You can expand beyond speaking one the same language. For example, English is my third language. And that's okay. I can learn other languages too. So what happens when we start learning the different cultures of movement? We develop the ability to move in a greater variety of ways, which translates into being in different way of being. And essentially, it's an ontological study of who you are and how you can be. Well, the US Army has this slogan I would love to use, but I don't think that I will be able to rip off the slogan off of the US Army. Be all you can be. Being all you can be essentially means discovering how else you can be in this life. How can you expand beyond the limitations of your current understanding of who you are, which is what we call identity. So if we look at the mask that people tend to wear or present themselves to the world in a certain way, this mask is called personality, which comes from the Greek word persona, which simply was the word for the mask that the ancient Greek actors wore in the theaters. Apparently they were not particularly good actors because they couldn't portray even facial expressions of fear or sadness or grief or anger or whatever. So they had to wear masks. Now, the outer layer of the mask that other people can perceive is what we call personality. This is how you're being perceived by others. But the inner layer of the mask that fits your face, so to speak, is what I call identity. Your identity is what you identify with. If you identify with this mask so much that it just fits perfectly to your face, it doesn't matter that the appearance is different. The shape and color and other expressions on the outer layer of the mask may be one way. Identity may not always match that. What happens then? There's going to be discrepancy. The more you have to pretend to be one way as opposed to knowing that you are some other way, the more tension that requires. The more effort it requires to present yourself in a way that you don't really resonate with. So, in other words, it requires a lot of effort to pretend to be somebody who you aren't. What do we do instead? We learn authenticity. We learn how to be more authentic in our own art, and also how to be more authentic in living our lives in general. So, as you can see, my focus is constantly getting broader and broader. From the essence of the energy arts, we expand to whole life, and even go beyond that. What happens when we understand how to work with the intermediate layer of the mask? It's like two sides of the same coin. People often also say, well, it's like mind and body, or your mind and heart are like proverbial coin. The head's on one side, the tail's on the other side. Well, often the heads and tails aren't minted perfectly in alignment. It's like this. You look at the heads, they're right up. You look at the tails, they're crooked or sideways or upside down. Look at the coins in your wallet. You may find some funny coins. That's right. It's probably because those people who print coins don't care. They don't pay attention to how the coins are being minted. Or they just do deliberately upside down. I don't know. But what happens is that if the mind and body are in misalignment, again, they struggle with each other. I don't know if you've experienced that, but I know many people I've worked with who experience significant amount of internal strife or warfare within. Essentially feeling like they have different forces pulling them in different directions and feeling like they're being falling apart. And the reason for that is because they actually have different forces that are out of alignment with each other, that are not in collaboration or in concert with each other. And of course, they create internal discord. So how do we create internal accord? How do we create harmony within? Well, we actually need to align the sides of the coin in a way that they would work well together. You look at the heads and the tails, and they're not crooked or misaligned. They are more or less in alignment. And of course, there are some degrees of fine-tuning that mastery requires. In order to be able to achieve this, you need to pay attention to the inner essence of the coin. What's inside the coin? So that you can do something about it. It's almost like, imagine Oreo cookies. The two cookies, one on one side, the other on the other side, are connected together with a layer of cream or whatever is inside of those cookies. I don't eat them, so I can't tell you for certain, but there is some kind of creamy substance there. If you pay attention to that substance inside the creamy interior of the Oreo cookie, you will be able to move these two sides so that they align better. When you do that, you literally start exercising the mastery of energy art, because energy is that substance that the coin is made of. Energy is what you connect with when you look at the heads and tails and wonder how you can reconnect them in a more aligned fashion. That's actually the energy that the whole coin is made of, or you can say the whole organism is made of. So if we can consider that we're made of psyche and soma, or your consciousness and your physical body, I don't even buy into this dualistic perception, by the way. I believe it's a unified organism, and energy is what makes it possible. And it just manifests differently. Energy can manifest in form of your mental experiences or projections or dreams. It may manifest in the form of physical experiences or somatic processes, physiology. But all of these are energy events. All of these are energy fields that we learn to observe and recognize as such, as energy fields. The moment you start working with physical body as an energy being, you will develop much deeper, much richer experience of the energy arts. Because then each and every step you take on Earth is an energy event. And also what happens in your consciousness. For example, everything in dreams is made of energy. What else can it be made of? It's the energy of consciousness. And we dream all the time. Not only when we're sleeping and dreaming, but also daydreaming. The mechanism of dreaming is the same. And whenever we are thinking of past, essentially we're daydreaming. Whenever we're thinking of future, we're also daydreaming. Even when we think about the present, most likely we are not catching the very moment when something is happening and we're thinking about it. We are processing what just happened. Or we may be thinking about things on a larger scale, or maybe on a microscopic scale. Even when we're thinking about what another person is thinking at the present moment, all of these are just examples of daydreaming in one way or another. So when we realize that all our mental processes boil down to dreaming, where everything is made of energy, and all our physical experiences boil down to energy events as well, then we are working with energy all the time, non-stop. That's exactly what the true essence of the energy arts is about. And this is exactly what I would love to help you discover for yourself and master at the level way beyond 99.9% of the population of planet Earth. In other words, when we're talking about how only maybe 5% of practitioners excel at the arts, you won't be among 5% of those practitioners. You will be among the 0.1%. In other words, 0.1% probably, or even smaller circle of people who are really at a high level of mastery in these arts. How will you get there? I will walk you by the hand. I will literally help you recognize all the pitfalls along the path, learn how to overcome them or how to navigate around them. I will help you recognize certain learning opportunities. And also, if you happen to run into some setbacks or going down a dead-end path, help you get back on track. It's like having Qigong master for a best friend. Most best friends will give us some ideas, perhaps how we can do things better. Best friends may even ask us how things are going and provide a little bit of accountability. Best friends may even help us out when we are stuck or in trouble. But they often don't have the skill set to really do this masterfully. Best friends often aren't motivated or consistent enough to keep us accountable on a regular basis. Most best friends are busy with their own lives, and they're not going to make a commitment with you in this capacity. On the other hand, I would like to make a commitment to working with you in the capacity of Qigong coach. When I work with you, I will not just see you once every 2 weeks as many coaches do. I will actually work with you every week, create a very consistent program that will take you from wherever you are in your level of expertise in energy arts or internal arts, or any other arts to that matter, but we'll mostly focus on the internal arts. I've also worked with plenty of MMA fighters and other martial artists, as well as athletes from other types of sport. So whatever your particular discipline is, we will take you on the journey from right where you are to where you dream of being. That's right. You probably have a dream. You probably dream of achieving something in your art that you haven't achieved yet. Perhaps you have a certain role model of accomplishing certain feats that you haven't been able to. If you don't have a role model, well, you can either work with me and I will provide as good of a role model as I can, or you can even come up with your own role model as yourself, perhaps in the past. Maybe you've experienced something in the past that you would like to replicate, whether it was a particular skill or performance or a level of confidence or anything else that you feel is lacking. And may also let go of certain things. So it's not always that we need to get more stuff, more skills, more information. We sometimes need to let go of certain things that may be bugging us down, certain baggage that you may want to let go of, and also certain details of what you may want to learn and add to your repertoire, add to your toolbox, so to speak. But without any further ado, I would also just encourage you to contact me directly and request a complimentary orientation session, during which you will see for yourself whether or not what I do would really benefit you. I have no doubt about it, but I want you to find it out for yourself. Just like any testing, I know the results of the tests are going to be more or less consistent from person to person, but I would like you to do the tests so that you essentially rediscover the wheel. Once you rediscover the wheel, the most amazing will happen. You will never forget how that wheel works. And another thing that is also going to happen is I'm going to interview you to see how coachable you are. For example, how open-minded you are, how capable you are of expanding beyond certain frames of reference or stereotypes of thinking, and also how much you can take responsibility for your own actions or results of your own either action or thinking. In other words, if we relegate responsibility to somebody else, usually that is a sign of not being very coachable. However, it's also something that can be improved upon. So it's not a black and white, you either pass or you fail. There are degrees of responsibility and responsiveness. And by the way, when you learn how to be responsive and responsible for your own actions and for the results of your actions, you will never blame anybody else for anything. You will never feel like a victim. And you will actually start being in charge of your own destiny. Now, I already mentioned what it would be like to live life problems-free. What would it be like for you to also live your life being in charge of your destiny? It's not something that many people experience. Very, very few people actually are in that small cohort of fully empowered individuals who feel that they are at the cause of their own life and their own destiny. Now, it doesn't mean that you deny or neglect the greater powers that be. You simply realize that you've taken as much responsibility as you could for your own karmic experiences. And then you simply let go and allow things to unfold and let chips fall, as it were, where they will. And you accept that, and then you move on to the next step. So basically, this is a really interesting process that I also will coach you about. How to recognize that you may have certain dreams, you may have certain intentions, but then letting go of the intentions and actually just paying attention is also just as a crucial and perhaps even more important skill. And last but not least, I would also like to offer this orientation session to you free of charge. That's right. Just for taking the time to enjoy our webinar today, I also want to offer this session to you at no extra charge. I normally charge $250 for my coaching sessions, and I actually don't offer in singular sessions for coaching as a program, either 3 months or 6 months or a year-long program. But for you, I will make an exception. And I won't even charge anything for that. So essentially, we'll be able to experience this. And then you'll be able to see, well, if this is the right path for me. Let's see how I can get on this path and travel down this road as far as I can. And if you make a commitment to working with me, I will make a commitment to working with you. And I won't even charge you $250 for the future sessions. Again, I will actually offer you an amazing deal that you will not be able to refuse. Now, how do you request the session? Simply email me at tantrapa@gmail.com. Once again, tantrapa@gmail.com. TANTRAPA@gmail.com. It's my private email. You are welcome to contact me directly, and I will be delighted to hear from you and look forward to working with you soon. Until then, namaste.